And then our gospel reading is Matthew 14:22 through 33. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking out on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why do you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So, preparing for the sermon today was a little bit of a debacle. Mostly it was probably my fault. I waited a little too long to get it started, and I had too many other things in the way. I thought I was ahead, but really I was behind. On Thursday, I sat down and put all of the pieces in place, and on Friday I practiced the children's lesson, and by Saturday, all I needed to do was write out the sermon. I typically put it off until the night before because I need the pressure of the deadline to get inspired. Once, I wrote it on a Wednesday, and by Sunday, I couldn't remember anything about it. But before I could get started on the sermon, I needed to finish the newsletter. So at about 10:30 last night, I'm done with the newsletter, and I just need to do my first draft of the sermon, and I'll finish it up this morning. But before I do that, I better print everything out so I have everything else ready. So I send everything to the printer, and then nothing prints. So I go upstairs to the printer and I set my computer on the top of it like I always do when it doesn't want to print, and send it again, and still nothing prints. And I unplug the printer and I plug the printer back in and try it all over again, and nothing prints. And then I send it to my mom, and she can't get anything to print either. So apparently we have new internet at my house, and the printer needs something done with it, or it won't print. And of course at that moment, no one knows where the manual is for the printer, or how to put it together, or anything to make it work. So instead of writing the sermon, I'm now in the car, headed to Chardon at about 11 p.m., so I can get everything printed and write my sermon in the morning. And I am, of course, driving a little faster than the speed limit, hoping that there's no sheriff between me and the office. And now I'm overwhelmed, and I'm tired and cranky, and it is not looking good. No one should be on the road at this time. I'm past the time that either gas station in Hamden is open, and even King Cone was closed by now, even though there were still people in the parking lot. And you know it's late when you get to Chardon and all the stoplights on 44 are just blinking red and yellow instead of the normal stop and go pattern. By the way, they switch at 10 p.m. and it's already an hour past that. And how in the world at this point am I going to get inspired to write a sermon at this rate? Well, as we all know, God speaks to us when we don't expect it. Today's gospel lesson is about the disciples going out onto the Sea of Galilee and finding themselves in the middle of the storm. Now, most of us are not walking out in the middle of the sea, in the middle of a storm, but don't we all have pressures that feel like we're in the middle of a storm? Wouldn't you know it, all of the pressure that I'm putting on myself to get everything printed and to write the perfect sermon, it's pretty much like a storm. I'm frustrated and I'm tired, and now I'm facing a deadline, some of what is my own making, and I just want to lash out at everybody that's in between me and getting this done. Has that ever happened to you, or is it just me? So here I am, driving on a pretty deserted road. I'm irritated and I'm mad, and I turn on the radio. And what happens first is I'm listening to an interview with Hugh Jackson, the former Browns coach, who the interviewer points out went 1-15 in his first season and 0-16 in his second season. Now, talk about depressing, and for those of you that are Browns fans like me, we have been pretty frustrated during some of those games. We lived through his storm every single week. And yet, in a few minutes of the interview that I heard, I kind of expected him still to be kind of negative in retrospect of his time in Cleveland. But he was nothing but respectful in his comments. So when they wrapped up the interview and they switched over the commercials, I'm still cranky and tired and overwhelmed, but I changed my radio station to 95.5 The Fish. And I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to get inspired for this lesson this morning? When is that inspiration just going to dawn on me? I don't want to write about the same thing, and now it's so late and I'm so tired. How will I ever put 2 words together, let alone 2 or 3 sentences? And what do I really have to offer about a storm? Well, out of the radio, the very first song that comes on is called Rescue Story by Zach Williams. And for some of you, I'm going to read you the words. I know a lot of you do listen to The Fish, but these are the words that really spoke to me. There I was, empty-handed, crying out from the pit of my despair. There you were in the shadows, holding out your hand, you met me there. Hey, he was speaking to me and about me. Last night, I was just like Peter. I was out of the boat, running around in the middle of the swirling storm, doubting that I can get a sermon done, and how am I going to get it done? How many of us face these types of pressures every day? Real pressures or the ones that we place on ourselves? I mean, none of you are looking for the perfect sermon. If you were, you surely would have picked somebody else to be up here. And yet, in the midst of the turmoil of no printer and my tiredness, God was there in the shadows, reaching out his hand to me there. Just like he met Peter as he was sinking into the watery depths, God reaches out towards us when we least expect it and when we're too tired to think that God will. The song continues, and now, where would I be without you? Where would I be, Jesus? You are the voice in the desert, calling out in the dead of night, fighting my battles for me. You are my rescue story, lifted me up from the ashes, carried my soul from death to life, bringing me from glory to glory. You are my rescue story. It occurred to me that he was singing about me here too. Here I am too in the dead of night, running around, trying to get a sermon and print a bulletin and so on. And he's rescued me literally and figuratively from a burning building more than once. In fact, I think it's because of that burning building that I'm standing here. God used the loss of our house to open the path to lead back to this church. And God's carried me from death to life more times than I can count, and I imagine more times than I have ever known. How many times have you experienced that blessing of, if I had been there a minute sooner or a minute later? We have all had times or even seasons in our lives when we are in the dead of night, or that our lives are nothing more than ashes, but God is there with us. God carries us from death to life to share in God's glory. Jesus tells us in his lesson today, take heart, do not be afraid. He is in control. He will meet us wherever and whenever we need him and wherever we are. Jesus' hand is outstretched to us. God is our rescue story. So the next time that you are running around in the middle of the night, just listen for God, the rescuer, and watch for his hand outstretched to pull you from death to life, and to meet you where you are. Amen.